Emerson was born in Boston, Massachusetts on May 25, 1803, son of Ruth Haskins and the Reverend William Emerson, a Unitarian minister. He was named after his mother's brother Ralph and the father's great-grandmother Rebecca Waldo. Ralph Waldo was the second of 5 sons who survived into adulthood. The others were William, Edward, and Robert Bulkeley, and Charles. 3 other children, Phoebe, John Clark, and Mary Caroline, died in childhood. His father died from stomach cancer on May 12, 1811, less than 2 weeks before Emerson's 8th birthday. Emerson was raised by his mother with the help of the other women in his family. His aunt, Mary Moody Emerson, in particular, had a profound effect on Emerson. He began his schooling at 9, and by the time he was 14, he went on to study at Harvard. In his senior year, he began to be known as Waldo, dropping the Ralph. He never stood out as a student and graduated in the middle of his class. He first got married in 1829 to 18-year-old Ellen Louisa Tucker. Once he graduated, he went to help his brother out in a school for young women. 2 of his younger brothers died at young ages because of tuberculosis during that time, and in 1829, he was invited to become a junior pastor at a church in Boston, and after years of leading the church and being involved with many organizations, he left soon after the death of his wife in 1831. This was due to some disagreement he had about communion, and once he left the pastoral tradition, he took up the job of lecturer and thinker. A short while later, he toured Europe, and he later returned the same year he left, only he was a changed man. A couple years later, he saw a lecture by a famous lecturer and contemplated lecturing for an occupation. In January 1835, he wrote a letter proposing marriage to Lydia Jackson, and he received a reply later that July. Once again, he was struck with the death of a close family member in 1842, when his son Waldo died at the age of 5 from scarlet fever. After this occurrence, his writing began to take a new and darker meaning to it, also in part by the death by his friend Henry Thoreau. In 1844, after working through these deaths, he had a new volume of essays prepared. In the year 1846, he started with a series of lectures on great men, and published many of his poems. He also spoke out against the annexation of Texas, and began to study Eastern wisdom. In 1845, he started to lecture largely about the uses of great men, a series that finished with the publication of Representative Men. By 1850, he was giving as many as 80 lectures a year, and gave over 1,500 in his 40-year career. Though he traveled all over the United States, he for the most part stayed in Massachusetts. In 1847, he traveled to England, and there he saw the gap between the upper and lower classes. And shortly thereafter, he saw those same gaps in France, as the many smaller revolutions there occurred. After returning to America, he continued writing and lecturing, and in his middle age, he traveled extremely fervently. Although slowly but surely his age caught up with him, and as he got older, his works began to show his coming to terms with his age. He had become quite famous in his middle age, and was a monumental public figure in America at the time, and in 1882 he died a quiet death of pneumonia.